this is the global phenomenon, and much of the writing on democracy is about democracy renewal, not democracy's progress, because democracy has been in a decline the past, let's say, 20, 25 years. And therefore, within the African context, what is really important for intellectuals who are dealing with this, sociologists, anthropologists, economists, political scientists, international relations professionals, all this must come together to sort of see what are the determining factors to develop democracy in a given community, in a given society. And then, of course, what are the best practices we can take from the global world constitutions and laws. If you see, for example, the laws on counterterrorism that are coming up in Africa and elsewhere, they're being used to demonize the opposition, to demonize civil society, and to demonize professional associations. And therefore, this kind of laws cannot be productive to society itself. And we have to be extremely careful in coming up with this. When we have a general law enforcement that has been instituted in any given nation, is there any need for a law on counterterrorism? Counterterrorism is not a special crime that has unique facets that needs a specific law for itself. The country's constitution, in the Bill of Rights, the state has the mandate to protect its own people, to protect its borders, and to ensure human security. And therefore, these laws could be enshrined within the existing laws of the continent. But unfortunately, we have laws on terror that are being used to demonize the opposition, to demonize civil society and intellectuals. And therefore, it becomes very difficult to understand that this kind of laws would be more productive to the buildup of democracy in Africa. In fact, there are some instances where people are quoting countries in the Far East Asia where they don't have democracy per se, although some countries claim they are more democratic than the West, but they're looking at a kind of benevolent dictatorship that brought Singapore to be an economic powerhouse, that brought Vietnam from its long war out, and of course it's an economic powerhouse now. China is an economic powerhouse. So the debate is, while Western democracy would want you to have elections without the necessary preparation of the continent, including civic education, voter education, and other forms of development where people can judge candidates that they're going to elect in terms of the economic, social, and political benefits they're going to bring to society. But what's really happening is people are threatened by the fact that they can have a regime that's going to hurt them more. Most of Africans have little to do with the state. Frankly, they would want, in fact, to be forgotten by the state completely, because what they get from the state is not good news. And in some cases now, this kind of civic agents that you have turned themselves into guerrilla fighters. These guerrilla fighters have taken government positions eventually, just to repeat what the previous governments have been doing. I remember a good friend of mine who is not here with us now, Claude Ake, a Nigerian intellectual, has written so profusely about this, where military coup d'etats and guerrilla fighters have become much worse than the post-colonial leadership in Africa that they overthrew. And therefore, when we talk about democracy, really Africa has to debate this within the African Union on what is necessary to be undertaken in terms of education, in general, education of the youth. Now the issue becomes unemployment is a very serious issue in Africa. So every politician will tell you, no, I'll create all kinds of jobs. A politician will come and say, I'll solve that problem. A politician will say, I'll come and destroy corruption completely, and I'll have a country that's free of corruption. But these same people come, take power, and eventually become the same as the previous regime. And therefore, it's very important that we educate our people. Now that we have borders that have been accepted after the Second World War, we have no other choice. We have these countries that we call our own countries in Africa. And therefore, within these borders, what is very important is to undertake serious studies on how democracy could be installed in Africa the way Africans want it, the way the communities want it, the way it benefits the communities, and not as a vehicle for people to stay in power for 3-4 decades. That's what we've seen in Africa, where they have stayed too long through elections. And therefore, when we talk about the rule of law, when we talk about the democracy, when we talk about the fundamental human rights of the African population, we're talking about a few elite groups that are the ones that are going to benefit from the system, and not the majority of the population. We have seen, for example, DRC probably has close to $24 trillion worth of minerals, but this is one of the poorest countries in the world. Why is this happening? DRC went into this mess under Mobutu Sese Seko, and then it was replaced by different regimes. And yet, even the Inga Dam, which is supposed to produce more than 50,000 megawatts of electricity that can technically supply the whole continent the way it is right now, they can't even build one dam when they have this kind of resources. But who benefits from the diamonds, coltan, uranium, and other things that we have in the DRC? Well, the first uranium that was used from DRC was to make the atom bomb. The diamonds, coltan, which is part and parcel of the electronic industry, is being taken out. So somebody is benefiting at the cost of the Zairean people, the Congo people. And this is a very important issue for me, because I've been to the Great Lakes region of Africa, very rich in resources. Like you have Central African Republic with similar resources. You have Cameroon with similar resources. You have most countries have oil resources, other kinds of minerals, agricultural lands, and water, which is now a very rare commodity globally. But the point is, if you've seen Al Jazeera's Frank Africa program on how foreigners interfere in African governance, on how they get African leaders to be elected, this is very telling. It comes from the horse's mouths. These are French ministers, ex-French ministers, talking to Al Jazeera on how they were undertaking coup d'etats and counter-coup d'etats in Africa. What I think the African Union has failed miserably is, since it's a club of African leaders, they only have rules and declarations that would only protect the existing government. For example, military coups are not allowed. You may know that Guinea now has been suspended from its membership in the African Union. And they always say, of course, you have to have a civilian government within a certain period of time. But what kind of civilian government do you get? The one we have in Sudan, where there is a kind of a hybrid military-civil government, where the military has the top-notch posts, and the prime minister is there only as a minister of economy, literally. Everything else is taken care of by the military. After 30 years of Bashir's rule, this is not what the people of Sudan deserve, and this is not what they died for when they tried to remove al-Bashir. So I can give you stories like this that go on forever in each country in Africa, where we have such problems. And of course, these governments are so corrupt that our poverty is not because we don't have resources, or as one American president said, that we are very lazy to work, but we work hard, we have the resources, but somebody else takes it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. And of course, if we're to because for example, there are a few things I was reflecting about when you were explaining on talking about the fact that we have not talked about education, educating the masses, because we want to run a democracy. But what kind of democracy do we even want to run in the continent if the people are not educated to even understand their part? Because democracy is going to be a kind of a bargain. I elect you to represent me. But what if I'm not enlightened enough to know that I'm electing you, that I'm giving you part of my power to do something for me? Because if I don't know, it appears that you are doing me a favor. And in this case, you can do whatever you like because you are just doing me a favor.